So thank you everybody for joining us today. Welcome to the session, and we're here today where we're going to hear a bit from the Sports Scotland facilities team about their guidance on reopening sports facilities. So obviously outdoor facilities are already opening back up for use again, and indoor facilities are going to start to reopen from the 26th of April. So it seemed like good timing to hold another session on the topic of opening sports facilities, and I'm sure there will probably be a bit of anxiety from operators and users around reopening facilities and the associated restrictions and risk mitigations that will need to be in place. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jude. I'm from Social Enterprise Network Scotland, so SENScot, and I support the Sport Social Enterprise Network. Ourselves, Sported and Scottish Clubsport have partnered up for this session, and Dan from Sported and Gary from Scottish Clubsport are also here on the call today. So given the mix of members on the call, I do appreciate that you won't all necessarily know what our respective organisations do. So just very briefly, SENScot are an intermediary organisation, so we receive funding through Scottish Government with a specific remit of supporting social enterprises. So whether they're already established or they're starting up or aspiring to become a social enterprise. Specifically, the members of the Sport SEN are typically organisations that are delivering sport or physical activity or both in order to achieve a wider social benefit within their community. So essentially a sport for development approach, and they're also seeking to do that in a financially sustainable way. So I'll just quickly hand over to Dan and Gary to also give quick introductions and just say a little bit about Sported and Scottish Clubsport. Gary, if I hand over to you first, is that okay?
Thanks, Jude. Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many faces today. My name is Gary Grieve. I am the National Development Manager for Scottish Clubsport. Scottish Clubsport, previously known as SALSC, or the Scottish Association of Local Sports Councils. We've been around for about 43 years now. We're a national partner of Sports Scotland, and we are an umbrella organisation for local sports councils that operate across the country and that support around 3,000 local sports clubs and associations. So helping with training, resource development, in some areas with funding, and sort of general volunteer support as well. Thanks, Jude.
Hi everyone.
Thank you, Gary. Oh, thanks, Dan.
Sorry if I jumped the gun, Jude. My name's Dan. I'm the National Manager for Supported. We are a support organisation working with 218 community sports groups across Scotland, and we help them in their capacity building and their sustainability, helping with things like finance, governance, business planning, etc.
Thanks, Dan. That was helpful. All right, so if anybody would like any further information about any of our organisations or feel that you might want to join any of our networks after this session, then please just get in touch with us. So just before I go any further, I'll skip through some Zoom housekeeping, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with by now, but if you can please be on mute if you're not speaking, that would just help cut out any background noise. If you do want to speak, if you could just raise your hand, your virtual hand or your real hand, although I was on a call on Friday and trying to raise my virtual hand and couldn't work out how to do it, so it's maybe not as easy as I thought it was. So anyway, just wave your hand about if you'd like to speak, and my colleague Mary from SENScot is also on the call, so she'll look out for anyone that's trying to catch your attention. Also feel free to use the chat function if you want to add any comments, ask any questions, share any information. We won't be doing introductions or anything like that, so but if you did want to use the chat function just to say who you are and where you're from, that would be great. And if you do want your contacts to be shared at the end if any connections are made, then happy to do that. And also just to mention, we are recording this call, but if anybody does have any concerns around that, then please do let me know. Okay, so just in terms of the format for today, we'll hear from Graham Finney first. So he's going to run through Sports Scotland's Getting Facilities Fit for Sport guidance, highlighting any key updates, and we'll provide some reflections and learnings from the past year. And Sarah Robertson is also going to provide some answers to some frequently asked questions that they've had. And then there will be a time for an open Q&A and discussion session. So please do take the opportunity to ask some questions or offer any comments relating to the guidance or just reopening more generally. All right, so that's probably enough from me, and we'll just get started. So I'll hand over to Graham, if that's
Great.
okay. Hi,
Thanks,
Graham.
Jude. Hi there. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today, and thanks to Jude and the other guys for letting us talk to you guys again. While Sarah's putting the presentation up, I'll just run through a few things just to let you know where we are. This really is following on from the work we did before the first set of easing of restrictions last year. What we aim to do is provide the best advice and guidance on how to prepare to open facilities safely. We hope that you find the information helpful. I've got to be honest, not much has really changed. Even with the release of the government information, I think it was end of last week or about physical distancing, calculating physical distancing, nothing's really changed for sport and physical activity. With the easing of restrictions linked to levels, it helps that some of us have gone through this before last year. However, there are a few differences. This time we're coming out of a hard winter, and if you've not had a chance to go into your facility, the changes will be different. The thing about having opened up before, if you have done it, means that you can refer back to how you did it and see if there's anything in place that would work well, and if you learnt in the lessons, how to change that to improve your opening. The underlying principles of our guidance, Getting Facilities Fit for Sport, are good for all types of facilities. They cover large facilities, large leisure centres, all the way down to single club pavilions. So it's really helpful for anybody to pick up and use. What's also good about the guidance document is that it relates it to the 4 stages of the Scottish Government guidelines, which they've released last year on how to get back to sport. Now, the main difference this time is that we've been living with the virus for over a year, and we have to acknowledge that and recognise that where we're at now is we're going to supermarkets and there's no one-way system. We're going to places where there's people are managing physical distancing themselves. So we have to look at things slightly differently to where we were over a year ago, when we didn't know very much and we weren't really sure what was going on. But also the vaccine is being rolled out, so there's a lot of people who have now got some protection there, but there are still a number of groups who don't. So there's still a number of people who need the second dose. There's a potential for a booster, and we don't know if there's going to be a need for an annual booster. That information is still to be discovered because they're still learning about the virus and the vaccinations. So Sarah can share her screen. I don't know if it's up there. In terms of the guidance we have, it's still set in the 4 stages: plan, protect, prepare, and review. And within that, the planning phase really is a consideration to ensure that you're prepared to open your facility, and it's a responsibility of management and what they need to do. And when we say responsibility, we mean the things that management have to sign off, like risk assessments, operating policies, and potentially updating a reinstatement plan. We mentioned that last time. It's just understanding what you have to do, the steps and stages you have to go through to get your facilities ready to welcome back your customers and members. Some of the things that are in there is really reviewing the operational, the programming, and checking that you're making sure that inclusion is covered in all aspects. We also need to make sure that current and future requirements are managed. So currently, if you're using your outdoor facilities, that's great. There'll be a plan in place for that. Your risk assessment will be done. Once you start to open up the indoor facilities, you have to bear in mind that everything has to work together. So you have to review those in line with what you've done before. And if you haven't done it, there's really good examples of best practice online. There's lots of sports clubs and leisure centres and local authority trusts who have published videos online of how they did things best in terms of best practice. Some of the things we really need to look for this time as well is making sure that you've got a COVID officer in place if you're to manage good practice, and also make sure they're liaising all that information back to members and staff and operational groups. You have to review physical distancing requirements so that everything is managed well within the facility. We then move on to the prepare section, and in that it's the actions we need to take to make sure a facility is ready prior to any sport and physical activity. So again, going back into your facilities, if you haven't managed to get in during the period of lockdown, there's several things we have to consider. Having come through a winter in some places will have been harder than others. You might need to check, well, you will need to check all your pipes, whether it's water systems or heating systems, to make sure there's no leaks in there. If pressure's dropped, you need to get qualified engineers in to sort those types of things out. It's worth noting that if you are checking your water systems and you haven't been into your facilities, it's worth getting them checked for Legionella and other waterborne virus and bacteria. So making sure that you've established the condition of your facility, that with the colder weather as well, if your heating systems have been run down to maintenance levels, it might be there's condensation and damp. There might be other things, infestation that you need to check. So that physical condition of the building has to be checked. If you did it last time, you'll probably know the main things to look for, but just run through the full checklist anyway. You have to make sure that any adaptations for physical distancing are in place and meet the requirements for your participants as they move back into the building. You have to check all your hygiene, the enhanced cleaning measures, because they'll still need to be in place. And we need to make sure that the health and safety plan is all in place as well. And looking through all of that, we need to communicate all these things and what you're going through again to your members and customers, so that they're clear that you're operating a safe facility. So instill that confidence in your members and customers to come back. Now, I appreciate some of you might not have opened last time, so if you haven't, it's just all these things are, if you're doing it for the first time, just make sure you're very clear about what you're doing. There's a lot of resources on the Sports Scotland website, amongst others, for risk assessments, enhanced cleaning plans and things like that. There's other resources as well that Jude, I'm sure Jude and the others can direct you to. The next types of things to look at in the prepare section is really to look at what you've done before. If you've not done it before, look at best practice and how to look at your changing rooms, look at how the ventilation works, make sure that any areas that are not going to be opened in the first set of restriction easing are clearly marked as out of bounds, and make sure that you've got the flow in and out of the buildings or from roadside to where the place of activity is really clearly marked. Make sure the signage is the same from last time, and really check that everything is in line with the current Scottish Government guidance. Some of the things that we've been talking to other groups about in governing body clubs in particular is to have patience with larger sports facility operators, because we appreciate that where you've got staff, they'll need to be inducted again, they might have been on furlough again, they'll need to come back and be given some sort of training in the current practice that you guys are going to be going through to get your facilities open. We'd also point you in the direction of all the Scottish Government levels and also the governing body guidance and return to sport, because they'll give you the real information on what is allowed in terms of what the activities that are going on, capacities that they've calculated for the halls or indoor spaces that will allow for the safe return of those sports individually. The last two stages are really the parts where people are back in the facility. So really what you need to do to protect the participants once they're in and your facilities open, and then reviewing and updating those plans regularly. As per the previous easing of lockdown measures, it will be done on the 4 stages. Currently everybody's in stage 4, hopefully moving to stage 3 very soon. And once those start to happen, you'll be updating your members and customers regularly. You'll be updating all your cleaning plans in line with what sections of buildings are open, reviewing physical distancing measures as more and more of the facilities are open to your participants, and communicating that at all times. As I said before, there's a number of really, really good videos from clubs and facility operators on how they've done it and how it's worked well. So it's really just looking at those things and making sure that we're following best practice. Some of the things that really need to be maintained is good habits, good hygiene measures, hand washing, physical distancing, and the wearing of face masks is crucial. All these things come from the clinicians and Scottish Government experts, so we're only repeating the information that we get from them. Really need to think about the culture change that we'd like to see. You know, hand washing and face masks, it should be the norm, not the exception. If you do have participants where maybe people have to stay behind, where you've got young children and young people, you should look to try and make sure they wear face masks, even in outdoor situations, because they may get too close. There may be situations where they're congregating and dwelling too long. So looking at best practice, similar to what a lot of parents are used to when they're dropping and picking up their kids from school. Some of the biggest concerns, I guess, we have is complacency coming out of lockdown. When we think about the physical distancing measures and things like that, with people starting to get the vaccine as well, there's maybe going to be an "I'm all right, Jack" mentality, but actually that's the opposite, because whilst you might have the vaccine, you're still contagious. And there's probably a few groups that we need to consider in there. There's people that won't take the vaccine, there's people that can't take the vaccine, and there's those that the vaccine won't work for. So they are still potential people who could be impacted significantly by the coronavirus. So we really need to be careful about how we manage that. That's why we're looking to try and look at that culture change of hand washing, face masks, and maintaining physical distancing where possible, all in line with Scottish Government guidance. And once we have our participants and members back in, we need to make sure the programming is right, so that we've got as minimal dwell time as possible and crossover of groups. So for those larger facilities where you've got multiple sports going on indoors and different physical activity in different areas, try and stagger the programming so that you don't have everybody arriving on the hour to take part in several different activities around your facility. We also need to make sure that we're reviewing and recording that participant attendance, because there is still the track and trace from NHS and Scottish Government. And again, it's just making sure that we have the inclusion highlighted at all times. And once we move into the review section of the plan, it's just going through the stages and updating regularly. If you come across something when you're operating your building, update your policies, update your risk assessments, update the flow around the building if that is necessary to help your members navigate the building better. As I said earlier, there's no longer one-way systems at supermarkets. People are more used to maintaining physical distancing and wearing face masks and hand hygiene. So look at your risk assessment slightly differently maybe than what we would have done a year ago, and try and manage that accordingly. There's also things to think about in terms of long-term planning, self-policing, so that if somebody does forget to use hand sanitizer, trying to instill a culture of self-policing within your members so that people are reminded to maintain that good practice. You need to think about that long-term planning, succession planning of volunteers, resilience planning in case this happens again. You know, there's stuff in the press already about the national or international accords on planning for the next pandemic. So if we can have a bit more resilience about what we do and better planning in what we do, then hopefully that can stand us in good stead for the next time. That's why maybe some of these things becoming good practice and habit will help us if there's another pandemic around the corner. So hopefully that's been useful. As I said, there's a lot of resource and the full set of guidance is up online. I think we've now got some FAQs that we've had, and we'll run through those with Sarah.
Everybody, yep, I'm just going to flick through a few of the FAQs we've had over the last year or so, or at least the most common ones that we've come across. So, without probably any real surprise, quite often, and one of the biggest questions we get asked is, can you access toilets and changing rooms at a club, at an organisation, at any sort of facility? So the easiest and quickest answer to that is we're currently in level 4, as Graham has pointed out, and obviously moving to level 3. So as of level 3, access to toilets and changing rooms are allowed. Scottish Government have suggested that, but what I would suggest that anybody is considering is that our initial advice remains that operators should encourage users to arrive at their facility ready for the sport or activity they're going to take part in, and then travel home to change and shower. However, if required, it is absolutely you are able to open your toilets and your changing rooms and showers for access, and especially when there is a case for additional support needs. So if someone needs that sort of additional support and needs access to get changed and use the showers, these should definitely be made available. Now, when you do open, and if you do open up these spaces, you really need to be looking at the same sort of principles of any space and looking at physical distancing, hygiene and cleaning guidance, just to make sure that that's followed. The other part of that to be considered is also the ventilation. So we know across all our clubs and organisations and facilities that changing rooms and toilets can be very different in terms of their configuration. Any sort of natural or mechanical ventilation can be very different. So one of the key pieces of advice is also where there's changing rooms that don't have any openings at all to allow fresh air in, or are served by poor mechanical ventilation, then what we're advising is these spaces stay closed. It's really important that these spaces are ventilated and safe for use. I'll just flick through some examples. So we have got some operational guides up on our website, which take the guidance that's in the Getting Your Facility Fit for Sport to a slightly more operational level. So they work hand in hand with the main document. And as you see, there's guidance for gyms, ice rinks, sports halls, sports pitches and courts, swimming pools, and also changing rooms. So if I flick to just give you some examples of the changing room guidance that we've got there, you can see the first sort of consideration you should be looking at is the physical distancing aspect. So you'll see from this example, if you're giving everybody 2 meters physical distancing, you can potentially get a capacity of 4 people in that room. Now, please don't feel that just because the space you're allowed to open these spaces under the Scottish Government guidance that you have to. It comes down to your risk assessment and how you plan to manage and operate these spaces as we go through. So by no means feel any pressure that these things have to be open. You have to be comfortable that you're meeting the guidelines and some of the requirements you need to go through into it. Here's another example, and just to pick up very quickly on the point I made earlier about natural ventilation. This is a changing room that has only one source of ventilation through the door. There's no cross ventilation, so this particular example, while you might get 2 people in to change, it's probably not the most viable in terms of safety. You can use these spaces and open it up for toilet use, for example, here. And then just really quickly, what is currently the guidance on our website is due to be updated. So this is a little bit of a sneak peek, if I'm honest, where we're looking at the changing room capacity versus that of the shower spaces. So where the showers that are open, you must maintain those physical distancing at all times. So you'll see from this example, there's 3 people allowed in that space in total. Only 2 of the showers can be used at any one time from those 3 people available. There's no partitions even in this space, so we need to make sure that physical distance is kept and maintained at all times. And then just finally, quickly to go through, you've got this particular example allows you to have 4 people in the changing room at any one time. It does have partitions between the showers, so therefore these showers can be used at one time by the 4 people if they require in that room. But what I would maintain is that the physical distancing will determine the capacity of these spaces, and that should never be exceeded regardless of what you've got going on and what other spaces are available. So whether you've got 5 showers or 4 showers, it doesn't matter. There's still maximum people in here is 4 in this particular example. Moving on to, will there be access to other facilities? When can catering services resume? The guidance from getting your facility fit for sport is very much focused on the activity and the sports related aspect of any facility. So if you've got a multi-purpose facility, whether it's a community hall or anything that might have some cafe facilities, for example, what you need to do is you need to try and marry up the guidance that's out there from the hospitality industry, which will deal with, say, its catering services, with that of the guidance that we are providing in terms of the actual focusing on the physical activity and the sport activity within these facilities. So it can be a bit of a minefield for people that have got multiple uses in any one sort of building or anything like that, but you have to marry them up with each. This guidance is very much focused on the physical activity and the sport aspect of it. Is there any advice on how to test water supply? Graham, can I pass this one over to you just for a quick one? I'm just going to throw him in, keep him on his toes.
Yeah, there's advice and guidance from Health and Safety Executive. It's worth checking with local companies who can test your water. And what they'll do is they'll come in and check all the services you have, toilet, showers, taps and the like. They'll check all your kitchen areas as well. The best advice we have is just to check with companies locally. There are some larger national companies, but it is just a Google search, to be honest. We don't really have any accurate figures on costings. Last time round, a year ago, I think it was about £250 for a test. And then if you do need your facility cleaned and the system flushed, it was an hourly or daily rate depending on the size of the facility. So it is all individualised to the type and size of facility you have. Did I miss anything, Sarah?
No, you didn't. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
We'll just move on to the next one. So, should you use flogging machines as a way to disinfect surfaces? Now, this is quite an interesting one. Obviously, there's a lot of companies out there supplying flogging machines and the likes. Now, what information that we're getting is that fog cleaning should not replace that of a deep clean of a facility. So it should be, fogging technique should be used in addition to a deep clean. So what you should be thinking about is deep cleaning your facility before it opens to get it back up to its normal operating standard, and then potentially looking at some fogging type machines in addition to that. But please don't feel that you have to go down a fogging route. That's just if that's something that your organisation has identified as a way of doing that. It's perfectly acceptable to use other cleaning products and the likes, but this one has come up a few times because clubs and organisations have been targeted by organisations selling these sort of machines. But it's just to let you know that it's not necessarily the answer to your prayers, as it were. There has to be a combination approach to the cleaning. The flogging machines aren't sufficient on their own. So just to finish off, as Graham had said, there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of guidance to get through. If you haven't opened your facility already, if you have, you'll be aware of where all these publications and advice sits. You can get a lot of information on the Scottish Government website, but also in our COVID-19 area on the Sports Scotland website. And just to give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the resources that we had mentioned earlier, as well as you can see under each of the sections, there's some templates, some checklists that might be able to help. But I'm sure Jude has also got a fair amount of resources there that she's shared in the past that might actually be much more appropriate to your organisations and the way you guys are set up. So just to be clear, there's a lot of information out there. It does take a little bit of time to digest, but we're all here to be able to answer or ask any questions on your behalf as well. So I'm going to go back to the group and see if there's any questions that have came through the chat.
Thank you, Sarah and Graham. That was really, really useful. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah or Graham? I know that there was one, well, there was a comment in the chat from David just around being more difficult if you're part of a multi-group. So using a community hall, is there any specific advice on this?
There's actually community hall guidance specifically on Scottish Government's website, but it does come down to the activities, or it does differ to the organisations and the guidance for specific activities. So it is a little bit of a minefield, as I said, in terms of marrying up that guidance. It can be a little bit more difficult.
Does that help, David, or did you want to expand?
It's not just a little bit more difficult, it's a hugely large more difficult, because you've got people like photography groups, you've got dance groups, you've got bridge groups, you've got sports, different sports groups all taking part. What we need to do, we've got a committee, and we're planning to meet sometime in June or July to see if we could find a way forward for all these different groups. They don't come in at the same time, but some groups do. There's about 10 rooms, and generally about 5 of them are used at the same time. So we've got a problem there of how to get people in and not cross over and things like that. So that's a thing that we'll have to do ourselves. It's really quite difficult, but we'll just have to try it. Okay.
David, what I would say is that if you are struggling in terms of what is allowed when it comes across the board, and if there isn't any sort of guidance for a specific activity, whether it's sport or not, so whether it's a football club or whatever that are going with their guidance, the Scottish Government indoor kind of guidance and numbers is absolutely the bare minimum that you should be going down a route of. So stick to that as your kind of base, and hopefully that will help you just in terms of space and capacity at the very least.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we can't possibly expect to have the number of players coming in at the same time as you used to have, because you've got the social distance aspect in each room, and I can only see ultimately a maximum of 12 people taking part at one time. Ultimately, I said, whereas we had 20 people, 21 people before, so we might have to run separate sessions. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Trish Thompson, you had your hand up.
So yeah, I was just wanting to ask, there's been some chat, and I know on the Sport Scotland website there's some discussion from KIBC guidelines on fresh air. I guess for us and probably a few of the facilities, a big concern is sustainability going forward. If we can only have 12 people in our pool because we've only got people, you know, is there any intervention? Was there any talk about sort of some systems of work? We're working on fresh air supply and taking the CO2 readings, and we'll keep that going until there is something else. But I'd heard rumoured that perhaps there was going to be some other intervention with KIBC.
At the moment, Trish, we are looking and looking a bit in a bit more detail in relation to ventilation requirements. They are what at this moment in time, that's the safest. The information we've got up on the website is the safest we can make the facilities. And I know it can be very difficult when we're talking about fresh air and privacy and trying to meet those the CO2 information, but we are looking at trying to get a bit more information and a bit more education. I think it's fair to say that what we're, as Graham has said, we're living through this right now, so we have to try and make the most of it, but we're definitely looking into that to see if there's any way that we can help further advise everybody on the best way to be meeting those sort of ventilation requirements.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Trish and Sarah. There are a few questions coming through the chat here. is the amount of drains an issue in shower rooms?
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. The previous guidance and the guidance that's currently on our website would suggest that a single drain, if a shower has a single drainage point, it can only be used by one person at a time. But we have since had information from Scottish Government clinicians to suggest that that's no longer an issue. And you'll have seen from the examples that I had put up that there were single drainage points, but as long as the physical distancing and cleaning standards are maintained, then there is no issue with the drainage. Our guidance will be getting updated in the next couple of days to reflect that. So it's probably quite a timely question.
It's probably worth caveating that with the fact that the guidance has changed because the clinicians' understanding of the virus has changed. It may change again. So be prepared to revert back to what we had previously. Don't think that everything is absolute when we put guidance out there. We just don't know enough about the virus and the mutations that are happening within that virus. I think you've all seen from the press the number of different strains that are coming in and out of each country.
Thanks, both. Yeah, I mean, I guess that is a really good point as well. Like, things are changing all the time in relation to everything to do with COVID. So I guess, you know, people do need to keep checking guidance and make sure that things haven't changed. And obviously if there are updates and things that we're aware of, then we'll certainly let our members know to defer to any quite major updates as well. So there's another question in here from Fergus, who's asking why an adult indoor contact sport moved from level 2 to level 0, thereby putting that back to the end of June. And that's one question. Second question, do you know the rationale used in putting out the indoor football fund, as many can access that?
Got to be honest, we have nothing to do with the change in levels. That's entirely down to Scottish Government. They set the levels and what sport and physical activity happens at each level. We just take that information and work with governing bodies to put it into the return to sport guidance that they produce. And in terms of the indoor football fund, that was Scottish Government funding. It wasn't directly through Sport Scotland, so we've got no knowledge of how that was distributed.
Thanks, Graham. I was just going to say as well, just so that it was clear, just in terms of those physical distancing examples that you were talking about, Sarah, those are in the changing room guidance, aren't they? So
yeah, there's two versions. So what you'll be able to see in the operational guides is that the examples I shown were around the changing rooms and how you would space that out from a physical distancing point of view. There's also guidance on physical distancing and space requirements for actual activity, and that's located within the sports hall operational guidance. So you'll be able to see that if you're looking at it from a general sport activity sense. So there are two versions, one for changing rooms, one for activity.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so water checks, is that separate to Legionella testing?
It's just water quality testing. It'll cover Legionella and hopefully they'll cover any other waterborne virus and bacteria that might be present. It's just to be safe. The last thing you want to do is put pressure on the NHS with a whole bunch of people getting sick from poor water quality. That's why we just mention it, because it is an issue. You know, we were working with a number of people and you know, Stadia like Murrayfield, they've got a nightmare with all the water services they have. They're going around every single tap, running it for 10 minutes every day. They're going around that stadium. You know, it doesn't matter the size of the facility. Things need to be safe when you open up. So the water quality is the same as Legionella.
Thanks, Graham. Does that help, Hannah?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. It's not something that had crossed my radar before, other than Legionella checks, but that's helpful. Cheers.
Cool, thank you. Another question here in the chat on social distancing and coaching. So it's from Jackie, from a target shooting background. coaching from a distance is not much of an option. We have an interest from arranging new members. Is wearing a face mask enough?
That's a question for target shooting. The guidance for the return to sport and coaching comes through them. We have some information on getting coaches ready for sport on the Sport Scotland website, which will link with the target shooting guidance on the return to sport. So it's best asking them about that, because there may be information within the coaching side of things that will allow for mitigating measures to reduce the physical distancing. But check with them.
Thanks, Graham. Does that help, Jackie? Fab.
Yeah, it's fine, thank you.
Thanks. Peter, a question from Peter. They've got a small pavilion, 4 changing rooms, 2 sets of showers, meeting room, and the 3 types of toilets. Should they operate in the front door out the back and permit use of toilets?
I think if that makes it safe in terms of their risk, if your risk assessments, Peter, in making sure that you can manage that process, then absolutely. There is guidance on the website, specifically on Scottish Government's website, actually, specifically on the use of toilets. So again, I would just say if the club have carried out a bit of the risk assessment to how they're going to manage and operate that process, and that works for your club, and everyone is kept and meets the standards for physical distancing and cleaning, etc., then certainly you can look at potentially opening that up. But it really comes down to again the clubs and organisation being comfortable with the standards that they need to meet to use and permit toilets. When we talk about toilets and the information that's out there, we refer to public, it's referred to as public toilets, but that's just any toilets in a non-domestic setting. So please take a little look at that, and that should be able to help you understand what you need to do. Now, there potentially, it depends how open you're going to be to that, and how much cleaning and things like that you can do in between sessions to allow you to manage that process successfully.
Fab, thanks. Graham's shared the guidance there around that, and we can certainly send out any guidance following this meeting as well, so that you'll have that. So another question here from Rick. Any general advice for clubs who access sports facilities to advise their members about before they return to the facility?
Yeah, get in touch. Contact the operators, contact the people who run the club or run the facilities, so you can be clear about what the guidance is about entering the facility, about booking, about the changes that might happen in terms of programming. You know, there's probably people on here better places to advise on programming and how that might have changed. So if you used to get an hour, it might be there's 15 minutes in between those hours, or they might have reduced their sessions to 45 minutes to allow for the 15 minutes clean and air change in between sessions. So it's just about advising people to get in touch with their operator to understand what it is they're going to have to do to be allowed back into the facility. So if it's clubs booking a sports hall for activity, they'll need to know the capacity. So how many members are allowed to take in and do a session. They'll need to understand what toilets and showers they'll be able to access, if at all. When we work with governing bodies and deliver to their members, in webinars, we talk about that journey from roadside to pitchside or roadside to the court, and how you actually get from the car park or drop off in the bus stop or whatever into the building and then out to the place for physical activity. So they need to know what that journey is. We talked about it earlier in terms of staggering those times. So it might be you've got 2 sports halls and you've got 2 groups in, but they arrive at different times. So it minimises dwell time. So that's the kind of thing that we would expect the operators and management of each facility to convey to their members and users, so that they're aware of how to manage their arrival and departure of facilities. Does that help?
Yeah, that's useful. I would just think at the absolute basic level, just the kind of do's and don'ts, irrespective of where you're training, you know, if it's outdoor or in a swimming pool or whatever. Is there any sort of generic templates that a club could just kind of adapt a wee bit before they get into the specifics about their own facilities per se?
Most of the turn to sport stuff is coming from governing bodies. So I do a lot of work with football and rugby, and both those governing bodies, along with the others, provide information to their clubs about what is expected of them, the types of activity that are allowed. They are all advising to arrive changed and leave without showering where possible. Swimming, we're doing the same with their operators and clubs to make sure that they arrived beach ready, I think they called it, and left without showering. I think you were allowed a rinse shower, possibly. So it's just about minimising that time within the facility and minimising the crossover between groups. So that's what the governing bodies will be conveying to their club members. So if the clubs haven't contacted their governing body, or they haven't had regular communication from their governing body about the return to sport, they should get in touch so they can understand what it is they're going to be expected to manage in terms of coaching, participant numbers. I know there's a number of sports have got modified games. We're doing a wee bit of work with netball. They've done some modifications to the game to try and increase the participants' time on task. So there's a number of things that are out there, Rick, but it really is working on what the governing bodies are saying is best practice for return to sport. Like I said, arrive changed, ready to go, and leave once you've completed your activity.
That's great, Graham. Thanks very much for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I guess it's all about communication as well, and just making sure that any of your users are aware of what's going on and what they need to know about. Okay, so Lee was looking for some guidance around ventilation and capacity. So Sarah's shared the link with the operational guides. Again, we'll send that out. And Nina's just mentioning here that sampling and testing for Legionella is different to microbiological water analysis. Yeah, thanks, Nina. Is there any other questions or comments from anyone? Still got 10 minutes, but I mean, obviously we don't need to stay on the call for 10 minutes, but while we've got Graham and Sarah here, I mean, I suppose one of the things that some people have found quite difficult in the past has been just around working out their capacity and looking at ventilation and things like that. So Graham and Sarah, I mean, you can be contacted if anybody is struggling and would like a bit more information if they're looking at that sort of stuff, can't you?
Yeah, both Sarah and I and the other guys in the facilities team have been working with a lot of groups, clubs and the like to help them work out capacities, work out what they can and can't do based on their facilities and the return to sport guidance from the governing bodies or activity leads, you know, because we've worked, whilst we're Sport Scotland, we've also worked with other groups as well. I had an email answered this morning from a dance group. So we're more than happy to help anybody who's got facility inquiries.
Thanks, Graham. We'll send everybody your way.
I'll not take the call.
All right. Is there any more questions from anyone? Any more comments? Anything Sarah or Graham thinks would be pertinent to mention?
I think there's been a few inquiries over the last couple of days as we move towards opening up some of these facilities come the 26th of April. What I would just say is if you've got clubs or you are a club that you're looking to access someone else's facilities, just to have a bit of patience with some of the operators, because it does take a bit of time, like you've all mentioned, to get through some of the guidance to put the things in place. And there's the other part to this would be that there's a few questions came through in relation to the use of spa and jacuzzi pools, and just to clarify, as long as the pools themselves are treated in the same manner as you would with the water quality as you would a swimming pool, these spaces can be used, but they must you must maintain physical distancing. So that might make that space a little bit more difficult to manage if it's in a smaller, more confined area. The one thing that in the 2 spaces in that sort of environment that can't be used would be saunas and steam rooms. Scottish Government have made it clear that these spaces need to be kept closed at the moment, and we'll provide some further update on that as and when we get some information. But in terms of spa pools and jacuzzis, these can be open, but you must be able to physically distance in them, which again, as like I say, might be more difficult in the smaller spaces.
Thanks, Sarah. Is that guidance on the Scottish Government website now?
It's not. There's nothing there specifically, but from the information that they're quite clear on what facilities can open under their definitions. So if you go onto the sports facility or the sports section of the Scottish Government, it's clear about the definitions of spaces, and if you apply the same logic and the same operations you would do to a swimming pool, then you're doing sufficient to allow them to open. So yeah, it's not there specifically, Jude.
Cool, that's really helpful. Thank you, Sarah. All right, so just David's left another wee comment here, just saying that it's been helpful for future discussions and actions in relation to the use of community halls. Thank you. There is a lot of considerations within the actions going forward, and we all need to try and be as positive as possible working within the guidelines. Yeah, absolutely, David. I think everyone's just going to have to muddle through and just try and be positive, and hopefully there isn't too many challenges and issues. Anyone else wanting to come in with anything before we finish up? No, don't think so. Unless everybody's just like me and can't work your virtual hand. Well, thank you very much, Graham and Sarah, for coming along and talking to us today about reopening facilities. Really appreciate it on behalf of us at SENScot and Sported and Scottish Clubsport. It was really good to hear from you, and certainly if we can keep in touch with you if there are anybody, if there is anyone after this call that's had time to reflect and maybe has some more questions, or even once people are starting to reopen their facilities and you're coming up against challenges, or you realise there is something that you're not too sure about, then please do just get in contact with myself, with Dan, with Gary. We can direct your any queries on to Graham and Sarah if that would be useful. So yeah, if nobody else has got anything else, then thank you all very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. See you. Bye.
Thank you.